It was a Monday morning, and we were sitting at the kitchen table after breakfast. I sipped on my coffee and skimmed through the morning paper when my wife, Clara, suddenly said, "Can you put that paper down, Ben? I need to talk to you." I set the newspaper aside. "What's on your mind, Clara?" "I'm leaving you, Ben. I want a divorce." "That's it?" I muttered, picking the newspaper back up to flip to the sports section. "I'm dead serious, Ben." Ignoring her, I continued reading. Frustrated, she slammed her hand on the table. "For heaven's sake, Ben. Put that stupid newspaper down and talk to me." "Talk about what?" "There's nothing left to discuss. Honestly, it's no great loss. You've been a lousy wife for over a year. So just leave." I dropped the newspaper on the table, stood up, and walked into the room I used as my office. Grabbing a notebook, a pen, and an envelope, I headed back to the kitchen. Sitting down, I wrote on the top sheet of paper. P.S. Thank you, thank you, thank you, and thank God she's finally leaving. I paused before sealing the note in the envelope, a thought crossing my mind. Reaching into my wallet, I pulled out one of the lottery tickets I'd bought the night before and tucked it into the envelope. Then I added a few more words. "Maybe if you hit the jackpot, you can keep your new guy happy enough so he won't stray. Best of luck, kid, you're going to need it." I signed it with a flourish. A deeply relieved Ben. Folding the paper, I sealed the envelope, wrote Clara's lover's name on it, and handed it to her. "When you see him, pass this along," I said. She looked stunned. "You know, just because you think I'm clueless doesn't mean I am," she snapped. "Fair enough," I said, taking the envelope back. "Maybe I should mail it myself. I don't trust you not to read it and toss it. Now, why don't you start packing and get out of my life?" "I'm not going anywhere," she retorted. "I'm not moving out just so you can bring your mistress in." I shrugged, poured coffee into a travel mug, and headed out. On my way to work, I made a few stops, first at the bank, where I closed our joint accounts and emptied the safe deposit box. Then I went to a different bank closer to the office and opened new accounts in my name only. Afterward, I canceled all our shared credit cards and had replacements issued solely in my name. Feeling accomplished, I dove into work and stayed late, wrapping up with dinner and drinks with my executive assistant, Valerie. I casually mentioned I was back on the market, and she laughed. "If you're single again, forget my sister, I want first dibs," she teased. Valerie had been working with me for a decade. She started as my secretary and proved herself indispensable. About 4 years ago, I promoted her to assistant, and 2 years ago, I elevated her to executive assistant, a role she more than earned. A few months back, I'd thrown a backyard barbecue and invited Valerie. She declined at first, explaining that her sister was visiting from out of town. I suggested she bring her along, and her sister, Tessa, turned out to be a stunning blonde with a confident edge. On Monday, Valerie jokingly told me that Tessa had developed a crush on me. Laughing, I told her to keep it to herself. Clara's jealousy could be vicious when provoked. So now Valerie tells me she's interested in me? I had never imagined she could feel that way. "Okay," I joked, "then Tara can take second place, and you'll move to first." "I'm not joking, Ben. I'm completely serious. I want to give us a shot." "Valerie, you might not feel the same way after I tell you what's on the table." "What do you mean?" "Clara says she wants a divorce. I'm leaving things to her and her boyfriend, but I have no idea how quickly they plan to act on it." "Wait, boyfriend? She's been seeing someone else?" "Yep. It started about 1.5 years ago. I guess she decided part-time wasn't cutting it, so now she wants to go full-time." "How long have you known about this?" Valerie asked. "Since the beginning, about 1.5 years. How did you find out?" A buddy of mine saw her going into a motel with some guy and gave me a heads up. I hired a private investigator to track her for a week, and he gave me all the proof I needed. And you sat on this for a year and a half without saying anything? What was I supposed to do? Flip out and blow up my whole life? Divorce laws here don't care who's at fault. I'd have to split everything, sell the house, divide the money, and say goodbye to the pool, the hot tub, and my woodworking shop in the garage. I'd end up in some tiny apartment. No, thanks. Instead, I decided to play it cool, let her handle the cooking, the laundry, and keeping the house in order. How could you live with her knowing she was cheating? You'd be surprised how fast love can sour into hate and then fade into indifference. I can't believe a guy like you went a year and a half without sex, she said skeptically. Who said anything about going without? If she was offering, I wasn't turning her down. Sure, it happened less often, and I avoided her on the days I knew she was with him. But otherwise, I just stopped making love, it became just sex, nothing more. Any clue why she started cheating? Not really. But I doubt this guy was the first. You think there were others? I can't say for sure, but in the 10 years we've been married, I've noticed her falling into this sort of mood a few times, maybe 4, if I'm counting right. She acted the same way back then as she's been acting over the past year and a half. It's just my suspicion, but I wouldn't be surprised if she was stepping out during those times, too. If my friend hadn't spotted her this time, I probably would have written it off as one of those women's phases. Maybe I'm wrong, but honestly, it doesn't matter. I know about this affair, and that's enough to confirm she's unfaithful. What's your plan now? Valerie asked. Wait. Wait for what? To see what she does next. She wanted a divorce, so now it's on her. I've already drained the bank accounts, cancelled her credit cards, and told her to leave the house. But here's the thing, she doesn't make enough to cover her expenses, let alone hire a lawyer. That means she'll need money from her boyfriend, and I have no clue if he's willing to fork it over. I assume they talked about this before she dropped the bomb on me, but who knows? Let me get this straight, you're telling me that if I'm interested in you, I'd have to get involved with a married man who has no idea when, or if, he's getting divorced. You're looking at this the wrong way, Ben. How so? If she's the one who files, she'll hold all the cards. You'll get served, and who knows what kind of demands she might make. She could push for temporary control of the house, claiming it's necessary during the proceedings. What if she accuses you of emotional or physical abuse and gets a restraining order to keep you out of your own home? You can't afford to let her dictate the terms. You need to be proactive, set the pace and make her react, not the other way around. And how exactly does that help you? If you sit back and wait for her to file, what if she doesn't? What if her boyfriend refuses to pay for a lawyer? That could drag on forever, and meanwhile, if you and I get involved, it could be used against you. She could turn it around and say, he cheated, too. But if you're the one to file, it sends a clear message, as far as you're concerned, the marriage is over. After that, whatever happens is your business, not hers. Legally speaking, yes, you're still married until the divorce is final, but no court will hold anything against you if it starts after you've initiated the process. So, you're saying I should stay away from you until one of us makes a legal move. Exactly. But think about this, if you file, you control the timeline. You could meet with a lawyer tomorrow and have her served by Thursday. That gives me the weekend to start convincing you I'm worth it. Convincing me? I'm completely serious, Ben. Why let an opportunity slip away if I'm at the front of the line? She had a point, and I couldn't deny it. Pulling out my phone, I hit speed dial for Josh, my oldest friend. We'd been close since 3rd grade, and now he was a divorce attorney, a family law specialist, as he preferred to call it. When he answered, I told him I needed his help and filled him in on the situation. Josh sounded genuinely sorry, saying he liked Clara and knew his wife, Amanda, would be upset when she heard the news. But he assured me he'd handle it first thing in the morning. He suggested I swing by his office around lunchtime to sign the papers, and then we could grab a bite to eat. Before we hung up, he asked, "Do you want me to include a restraining order?" I paused for a moment, then said, "Yeah, add one." Clara made a point of telling me that if I caused her any trouble for leaving, her boyfriend, Tom Noble, would straighten me out. "This is your house too," I admitted. "If you've decided to stay, I can't force you to leave. But don't think for a second I have to like it, or that I'll talk to you. Move your things into one of the spare bedrooms and keep your distance." I finished my beer and headed upstairs to what used to be our shared bedroom. I got ready for bed, feeling like I'd set the wheels in motion. I'd given her plenty to think about, and now she'd need to discuss it with Tom Noble and figure out her next steps. That would take time Josh could use to serve her with the papers and secure the restraining order. Of course, I could be wrong, maybe she'd already met with a lawyer, and the papers could be on their way to me. But it seemed unlikely. I'd emptied the accounts and cancelled the credit cards, and the cash I withdrew matched what I expected to find. If she had hired a lawyer, she would have used our money to pay for it. Sure, Noble might have footed the bill, but I doubted he'd step up like that. All I could do now was wait and trust Josh to make the first move. The next morning, I got up early and left the house before she emerged from her room. I stopped at a cozy cafe for breakfast, one of those places that felt more like a bed and breakfast than a diner. As I sipped my coffee, I started jotting down a list of people I'd need to call once B was served. I wasn't about to let her paint me as the villain. I'd make sure everyone knew the truth about why the marriage was ending. At work, Valerie mentioned she was looking forward to the weekend, and I realized I was too. I met with Josh during lunch, signed the paperwork, and he told me he'd head to the courthouse right after to file everything. "You still want her served at work?" he asked. "Absolutely," I replied. "Tomorrow around 10 would be perfect. Let me know as soon as it's done, I'll be changing the locks before she gets back." After lunch, I returned to the office and arranged to take the next day off. Before heading home, I called a locksmith and scheduled a rush job for the following day. It cost a little extra, but I didn't care, it was worth every penny for the peace of mind. When I got home, BEA's car was in the driveway, but she stayed out of sight. She must have decided to keep to her room, and I was fine with that. The next morning, I left the house early again and returned to the same cafe for breakfast. Angie, the waitress, approached me with a smile. "Where's B? I'm used to seeing you two together, and now it's just you 2 days in a row. You won't be seeing us together anymore." "We're splitting up," I said. "I see," Angie replied, taking my order. When she returned with the bill, she said softly, "I wrote my number on the back. Not the restaurant's, mine." I stared at the slip, stunned, as Angie walked away. 2 women in 2 days had made it clear they were interested in me. And yet, I couldn't understand why I hadn't been enough for the woman I married. I'd never know, though, I had no intention of asking. After finishing my coffee and glancing at the morning paper, I waited until I figured B would be at work. Then I went home, packed up her belongings, and moved them to the garage. At 10:15, Josh called. "It's done. The papers have been served," he said. I called the locksmith right after, and within 20 minutes, he was at the house, changing the locks. Not even an hour later, Clara's car came screeching up the driveway. She couldn't miss the open garage door or the big cardboard sign that said, "Clara, all your stuff is in the garage." She froze in place, staring at the sign for a minute before heading to the front door. When her keys didn't work, she rang the doorbell a few times, but I didn't bother answering. Eventually, she gave up and left. I peeked into the garage afterward and saw she'd taken a couple of bags. About 2 minutes after she drove off, my phone buzzed. It was Clara. "Hello?" I answered. "You're such an... Did you really have to embarrass me in front of my coworkers?" "It's a lot better than letting you humiliate me in front of mine," I shot back. "What the hell is with this restraining order nonsense? I was worried you might ask Tom to show up and teach me a lesson for being rude to you. That's complete and you know it. I need to grab a few things from the house. Everything of yours is already in the garage, Clara. I didn't change the garage code, so your remote will still work. If there's something you can't find, make a list, tell me where it is, and I'll move it to the garage for you. Stop being ridiculous, Ben. You're blowing this out of proportion and making it way harder than it has to be. Sorry if it's inconvenient, but after everything you put me through, this feels like the least I could do for my own sanity. Be thankful I kept things civil. Goodbye, Clara." I hung up, grabbed the phone, and started working my way through the list of people I needed to call. Most were shocked when I explained that Clara had been cheating, though two weren't fazed at all. One said, "So, you finally caught her, huh?" While the other added, "Honestly, I thought you guys had an open relationship. She was always out with some guy, and you never said a word." I mentally crossed those two off my friends list. The hardest call was to Clara's parents. They tried to convince me I must have been mistaken. I'd always liked them, they treated me like the son they never had, but I wasn't about to let Clara spin the story to make it look like everything was my fault. If I didn't explain my side first, they'd end up seeing me as the villain, and I wasn't going to let that happen. After finishing my calls, I went through the house one last time to gather anything of Clara's that might have been missed. Then I made myself a quick lunch. Just as I was finishing, the guys from Aries Security showed up. I didn't trust Clara at all. She'd already shown she wasn't above bending or breaking the rules, so I had a full security system installed, complete with cameras. The next day at work, I told Valerie we were all set for the weekend. She grinned and said, "Tomorrow night, we'll start with dinner and dancing." Her excitement was contagious, and I couldn't help smiling when I got home. But as expected, Clara couldn't leave well enough alone. She'd come by, taken a few more things, and then broken into the house through the garage's connecting door. The kitchen was a disaster, plates and glasses shattered all over the floor. In the living room, a few lamps had been smashed. But the piece de resistance was what she did in the bedroom. The cameras caught her yanking all my clothes out of the closet, piling them on the floor, and then squatting over them to urinate. Every second of her rampage was recorded, providing clear evidence of not just the restraining order violation but also her malicious and destructive behavior. I called Josh immediately. He reached out to the police, and they came over to file a report and take photos of the damage. The following day, Clara was arrested at her workplace and hauled to jail. She was fingerprinted, photographed, and brought before a judge. They charged her with violating the restraining order and deliberately destroying private property. The judge set a hearing date and released her on her own recognizance. Honestly, I hadn't expected things to escalate so much. My date with Valerie was great, and we quickly planned a second for Saturday. That went just as well, and by Sunday, we found ourselves enjoying a picnic together in the park. On Monday, the restraining order hearing took place. The judge didn't waste time after watching the security footage. Not only did he make the restraining order permanent, but he also ordered Clara to pay for everything she'd damaged, cover the dry cleaning for my clothes, and foot the bill for cleaning the bedroom. He gave her 10 days to comply or face jail time for contempt. To make a point, I hired the priciest cleaning service I could find. Unfortunately for me, Clara managed to scrape together the money and fulfilled all the judge's orders. I was disappointed. I would have loved to see her spend time behind bars for contempt, but she dodged that bullet. Over the next 2 weeks, Valerie and I continued seeing each other. While we shared some passionate kisses, nothing more happened. Neither of us felt right about taking things further while I was still technically a married man. Even so, things were steadily moving in a serious direction. Clara and I didn't contest the divorce, and it was finalized 6 months later. It was a standard no-fault settlement, with everything divided equally. I refinanced the house and bought out her share. What Clara didn't know was that I had a separate savings account set aside for a round-the-world anniversary trip I'd secretly been planning. Since she had no idea about it, I didn't have to share a dime. She also didn't know about 2 certificates of deposit I'd stashed away, purchased with my last 2 bonus checks. There was one final small win for me. Clara was awarded alimony, but only for 2 years or until she remarried. Instead of the $500 a week she'd requested, the court set it at just $100. Josh said we'd gotten incredibly lucky with our judges. The same family presided over both cases, a pair of cousins, as it turned out, who apparently spoke about their work. Both judges had been through messy divorces with cheating wives in the past, and while they adhered to the law, they weren't inclined to grant Clara any extra leniency. Whatever Clara and Tom Noble had together clearly wasn't built to last. 7 months after the divorce, she was living with her parents. By the 8th month, I was at the Hilton bar, enjoying a beer and a steak sandwich for lunch, when someone slid onto the stool beside me. "Can I buy you a beer?" a voice asked. I looked over and was surprised to see none other than Tom Noble, Clara's former boyfriend. "Go ahead," I said, more curious than anything else. He signaled to Agnes, the bartender, and ordered 2 beers. After she brought them over, he took a sip, set the glass down, and stared at it. For a few moments, he silently peeled at the label, letting bits fall onto the bar. Finally, he spoke. "I didn't mean to mess things up for you," he said, his eyes still fixed on the bottle. "When I met her, she wasn't wearing a wedding ring. I didn't know she was married. Honestly, she wasn't acting like a married woman." He paused, took another sip, and continued. "She was out at Bud's bar with some co-workers. I asked her to dance, and she said yes. I bought her a drink, and she invited me to sit with her group. We danced a few more times, and by the end of the night, I asked her out, and she agreed. I fell hard for her. Within a month, we were sneaking off to motels whenever we could manage it. At first, we had to use motels because I had roommates who were always around. She told me we couldn't meet at her place because she lived with her disabled mother. That's also why she said we couldn't see each other more often. She had to stay home to care for dear old mom." He sighed heavily. "Eventually, I got my own apartment, and we didn't need motels anymore. Even though we still met sporadically, I was head over heels for her. I was even planning to propose and buy a house big enough for us and her mother. But before I got the chance, someone I knew came up to me and said, 'Why are you sleeping with a married woman?' I was ready to punch him," Tom continued, "until he told me that Clara was married and cheating on her husband, and that it wasn't her first time. Turns out, about 2 years earlier, she had an affair with his brother. When his brother found out she was married, he ended it immediately. I didn't want to believe it," he admitted, "but then I got your letter. I held on to it for about a week before I finally confronted her. She broke down crying and said she didn't love you, claimed you were an abusive drunk who beat her and tormented her emotionally. She told me she hated you but was too afraid to leave because you supposedly threatened to track her down and kill her if she ever left. By that point, I'd done some digging on my own and realized she was full of lies. That was the end of any thought I had of marrying her. But, she was incredible in bed. And since you'd already kicked her out, I let her move in with me. As long as we were sleeping together, things were fine. But after the divorce was finalized and she started talking about marriage, I decided to call it quits." He took another sip of his beer and leaned back. "My parents' marriage ended because my mom cheated on my dad. She got custody of me, remarried, and then cheated on her second husband. After that, she married a third time and cheated again. That's when I started to believe in the saying, once a cheater, always a cheater. I told Clara as much. I told her we could keep things casual, a friends with benefits arrangement, but marriage was off the table. About 3 weeks later, he said with a shrug, I came home from work, and she was gone. He paused, taking another sip before adding, I've heard rumors that you knew she and I were together from the start. Why didn't you just divorce her then? You already answered that, I said with a grin. She was amazing in bed. I figured, why not let it ride? I got the sex, and she still handled the cooking, cleaning, and laundry. Honestly, it probably would have stayed that way if she hadn't decided to leave and ask for a divorce. He chuckled softly, shaking his head. I never thought I'd say this to you, of all people, but I miss having her in my bed. He finished his beer, stood up, and reached into his pocket. Pulling something out, he placed it on the counter and slid it toward me. What's this? I asked, eyeing the envelope. The lottery ticket you gave me. It won. This is your half, he said. I opened it to find a cashier's check for an enormous sum. A very significant amount of money. I waited until the divorce was finalized to give it to you, he added, so she wouldn't get a penny. Take care, man. With that, he walked away. When I returned to the office, Jan, my assistant, gave me a curious look. You look like the cat that just ate the canary. Was lunch that good? Lunch, I said with a sly smile, was extraordinary. Oh, and about Jan, she's my assistant now because Stella doesn't work in the office anymore. She's home, painting the nursery for the twins we're expecting. Thanks for sticking with me and listening to my story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts.